Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a press conference with Canada's NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh and NDP candidate for Toronto Danforth, Clare Hacksel. We are going to start with a few remarks. After remarks, we'll take questions in person, and then we will go to questions on Zoom. I will let you know right now if you'd like to ask a question via Zoom to please use the raise hand function for a question and follow-up. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à une conférence de presse avec le chef du NPD du Canada, Jagmeet Singh, ainsi que la candidate du NPD pour Toronto, Danforth, Clare Hacksel. On va commencer avec quelques remarques de Claire et Jagmeet. Ensuite, nous allons prendre des questions sur place et ensuite, nous irons sur Zoom pour des questions en ligne. Veuillez utiliser la fonction « Levez la main » pour poser votre question et question de suivi. Claire, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm very proud to introduce leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh. I want to share with you something that happened this week. Yesterday, I volunteered at a food bank in my community. That food bank fed over 1,000 people. That's children, seniors, families, students, all who couldn't afford to buy food for themselves. One of the most essential things a person can do. And meanwhile, this week, we learned that the Liberals gave nearly $26 million to profitable corporations like Loblaws behind us. This is so fundamentally wrong and speaks to the disconnect between Justin Trudeau in Ottawa and regular people just trying to get by in regular stores every day. And people are fed up. Thousands of people are protesting Loblaws this month because they're frustrated with greedflation and these outrageous prices for just the basic necessities. And they're not just frustrated with Galen Weston. They're frustrated with Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre, who care more about their lobbyist friends and big corporations than they do about the 1,000 people who came to the food bank in my community yesterday. And that's why I am so proud to have our leader here today to talk about the NDP. Jagmeet Singh has been the only leader who has tried to fight back against these big corporations, and I'm so proud to have him here sharing what the NDP will do for everyday Canadians. Jagmeet?
Thanks so much, Claire. I mean, Claire, you really captured it so well, and that's why we're so proud to have you, Claire, as our candidate for Danforth. As Claire said, it is a basic necessity that people should be able to put food on the table. But the reality is, like Claire shared with her story about the food bank usage in her community, people are not able to buy the food they need. 1 out of 5 Canadians are skipping a meal because food prices are so high. Food bank usage is at a record high. So there's stories like Claire's across the country, in every province, in every community. And that's wrong. What makes it even worse, though, is that at a time when people are hurting to buy food that they need, these corporate grocery stores are making record profits. And to add insult to injury, instead of taking on the corporate greed that is driving up the price of food, governments have been giving massive corporate handouts to these rich corporations. In terms of corporate handouts, the Liberals and Conservatives combined have given massive corporate handouts to the tune of $2.35 billion to corporate grocery stores like Loblaws behind me. In addition, most recently, we've learned that instead of stopping these large corporate grocery stores from ripping off people, Justin Trudeau gave millions of dollars, $26 million to Loblaws and Costco to buy fridges. These highly profitable corporations do not need our public money. What government should do is fight back, stand up for people. While we are so inspired by the attempt for people to come together to stop going to Loblaws, it shouldn't be on people to take on corporate greed. What we want to see is government step up. When large corporations with deep pockets, billionaires are exploiting people, people can't do that on their own. They can't fight back on their own. That's where governments have to step up and defend them. You Democrats are the only party with the courage to take on corporate greed. We want to put in place stiff penalties for any corporation that gouges or rips off Canadians. We want to have more protections in place for consumers. We want to tackle corporate greed, bring down the prices of food, and ensure that people can afford their groceries. That's what we need to do. We've got to take on corporate greed, and we've got the ability to do that. I put forward a bill that puts more penalties in place that ensures that we're going to ensure that these companies can stop ripping people off. So that's what Democrats want to do. While Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau want to cater to big CEOs and these corporations behind me, we Democrats are fighting for you. I'll do that again in French, and then I'll take your questions. C'est clair que c'est essentiel que tout le monde doit avoir la capacité de faire l'épicerie. Mais maintenant, c'est impossible parce que ça coûte trop cher. Et on sait que à travers le pays, on a une utilisation des banques alimentaires record. Les gens ne peuvent pas rejoindre les deux bouts et particulièrement, c'est impossible de faire l'épicerie parce que les coûts sont très hauts. Et qu'est-ce que les gouvernements conservateurs et libéraux, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait? Ils ont donné des grands cadeaux. Ils ont donné des grands cadeaux aux grandes entreprises d'épicerie. Au lieu de faire face à cette exploitation, ils ont donné les cadeaux. Et récemment, on a appris que Justin Trudeau a donné 26 millions de dollars à Loblaws et Costco. C'est la mauvaise chose à faire. Ce qu'on doit faire, on doit faire face à cette exploitation de ces grandes entreprises. Et c'est exactement ce que les néo-démocrates vont faire. Nous sommes inspirés par les gens qui disent que l'exploitation, c'est fini. Ça suffit. Mais ils ont besoin d'un partenariat. Ils ont besoin d'un partenaire, quelqu'un qui veut travailler ensemble avec les gens. Ça, c'est nous, les néo-démocrates. On est là pour vous. On va faire face à cette exploitation et on veut réduire les coûts d'épicerie pour vous et votre famille. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
So we're going to start with questions on site. We'll do one question, one follow-up, starting with Global TV.
Morning, sir. Kurt Brown with Global News. A couple questions from our Ottawa bureau. Do you think public servants working in the office 3 days a week instead of the current 2 days a week is too much?
Our position on that is this is something that the government should negotiate with the workers. They had an agreement in place, a memorandum of understanding, where they said that they would work with the workers, they would work with the unions to establish the best way to move forward. They should honor that commitment they made and work with the union, work with the workers to get to the point of something where they can achieve.
You have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Do you expect the federal public service workers will get much sympathy from members of other unions who have to show up on site for their jobs 5 days?
There's a solidarity across the board for all workers that the employer should follow through on commitments they've given, whether it's in a collective agreement or it's in writing in terms of an understanding. And in this case, the federal government, the employer in this case, has said we will work with the union, we'll work with the workers to establish the best way to move forward in terms of where workers are going to be doing their jobs. That is something that should be respected. If an employer has an agreement with the workers, that agreement should be respected, whether it's in writing, whether it's a collective agreement, whatever the form of that agreement is. That's really the crux of the matter now. The federal government's not living up to a commitment that it made to the workers, and we will always stand on the side of workers wherever there's a conflict of this nature.
We go to City News next.
Yeah.
Jamie with City TV. These questions are sent in from Cormac Sweeney up in Ottawa.
Oh, yeah.
Cormac wants to know. And then I have one question too. So there has been the national boycott of Loblaws going on for about 10 days now. And suppliers have told the Toronto Star that they didn't notice any drop in sales and stock for the company. They didn't notice any supply drops, and the stock for Loblaws is at an all-time high. Why do you think this movement hasn't made a difference as of yet?
I would push back and say it's made a difference in society. It's raised a lot of awareness. It's continuing the demand of people to say, this is enough. These rich corporations are ripping us off and we've had enough. But what it also shows is people can't do it on their own. While people have raised their concerns, and it's a good thing, the boycott is a powerful thing. What we want to see now is government take action. Listen to the demands of people. People are frustrated, are fed up with the high price of groceries. And we know, as you mentioned in the question, that Loblaws and many of these other corporate grocery stores are experiencing record high profits. They're seeing their stock prices at a record high while they're ripping off Canadians. People can't fight back against them on their own. That's what we're supposed to do. That's what I'm doing. I'm the only leader that's ready to take on these corporate giants, take on corporate grocery stores. We got to fight back, stand up for people, stop them from ripping you off, put in place better laws to protect people. The Liberals act like the market's going to fix itself. They act like they have no power to take on corporate greed. They do. Federal government has significant power to stop exploitation, to protect consumers, to put in place stronger penalties when companies do exploit people. That's what we want to see happen. We want to see strict laws that protect consumers, against the exploitation of these big corporations. And that's what New Democrats are fighting for.
You have a follow-up?
And the follow-up is, yes, profits are high, but the actual margin, the profit margins on groceries, it was very small. It's 3.5%, according to Cormac. And they've been overall high for the profit, but this profit, can you explain to the business how it can operate with more taxes and such a narrow profit margin is what I'm going to say. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, a couple of things is that the grocery store corporations are pushing back and saying their profit margins are low. If you compare the profit margins to other similar jurisdictions, they're actually much higher than they are, for example, in the States. In addition, the Competition Bureau confirmed that they increased their profit margins during a time when Canadians are struggling to buy their food. On top of that, we've got evidence not that long ago in 2018, where corporate grocery stores and big bread producers colluded to rip off Canadians. And there's estimates that put that collusion having cost Canadians $5 billion. They've ripped off Canadians to the tune of $5 billion and got minimal fines for doing so. So there's ample evidence that these corporate grocery stores have been ripping off Canadians in many different ways. And we need to fight back. Canadians deserve a government that's going to fight for them. And it's become very clear to me that the Conservatives are too cozy with these rich corporations, that the Liberals have no intent to take on corporate greed. You Democrats are the only ones that are going to stand up for you and fight for you to make sure you can afford your groceries.
We have one more.
While we were sitting here, setting up, the podium heading view said a woman stopped, came out of her car, muttered some words about muttered words about the NDP party. Then she said the words infida, and she also said that you should be dispatched. The emotion in this on this election coming up is extremely high. People are. Why is that? And should language be brought down from all parties?
I think that there's a lot of frustration in the country around a lot of things. There's a lot of painful things going around the world. There's really huge struggles in Canada. Like I mentioned, on a fundamental thing, as Claire mentioned, just buying groceries is becoming so hard. I remember when folks were sharing with me their stories about grocery shopping, it used to be fun. Just to go to the grocery store, look forward to buying groceries, maybe to make a special meal and follow a recipe at home. And now it becomes this painful experience where you're not sure if you can afford the things that you need. Forget the idea of getting the special treats. It's no longer in people's budget. So all those things are more stressful. The cost of rent is up. The cost of living is up. Everything is getting more and more expensive. And they don't see governments doing anything about it, really. And while they're hurting, the prices of everything is so high, they see the CEOs for these very same corporations making huge bonuses and their companies making record profits. All that feels so wrong and so frustrating. And I get that. And I want people to know you're right to be angry that the cost of living is so high. You're right to be frustrated that government is allowing this to happen. And we're fighting back. I want people to know that they should have some hope, that there are ways to put in place protection for people that will bring down the price of food, that will protect people from exploitation. We can do this. It means having the will and the desire to protect people and choose people over billionaires. You Democrats have that will and that desire. We're ready to fight for you. We've been doing that in Parliament. We'll keep on fighting for you. But I want to give people hope. We can take on corporate greed, we can bring down the price of food. And I feel like that's one of the ways to bring people together, show that there are things that we can do to make life more affordable. We can take on corporate greed. We can bring down the price of food. We can build homes that we can afford so that people can actually build a good life. These are very possible. And I want to give people that hope.
We're going to go to questions on Zoom next.
Just a reminder to use the raise hand function to ask a question and follow-up. Un rappel d'utiliser la fonction lever la main pour poser votre question et question de suivi. We're going to start with David Thurton with the CBC. Please go ahead.
I was just saying, Budget 2024 floats the creation of a youth climate corps, and the government is piloting the use of a humanitarian workforces to respond to wildfires. I'm wondering what you think about that. And more specifically, is that an adequate response for what is probably going to be another brutal wildfire season, unfortunately?
In terms of the forest fires, it is really horrific what we saw last year, some of the worst forest fires, and we saw communities be evacuated. We saw huge impacts of the extreme weather across the country. We saw in some communities, extreme flooding, and then we saw extreme forest fires in the very same place. So this is really serious. What we've called for is to have a national firefighting force where we deploy resources across the country. It's clear that we rely a lot on international firefighters because we don't have the resources in Canada to deal with the level of what we're up against. So we've called for that, something that Richard Cannings, one of our MPs, one of our teammates, has raised, something that I've raised, that we need a national firefighting team that can be deployed across the country. The idea of a youth corps and youth corps being involved in protecting the environment, something we support, and we've been calling for enhancements and investments in a youth corps. The idea of having young people participate in protecting the environment, something we really support. We think it's a good idea. But in terms of using that to fight fires, I think what we really need is a dedicated, trained team with the equipment necessary, the training necessary, the resources necessary to deal with something that's becoming a very serious problem across the country, and it's only getting worse.
But you also have the emergency response, which is part of responding to wildfires. And the Liberals are piloting a humanitarian workforce that would see NGOs such as the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, the St. John's Ambulance, and the Salvation Army help with that emergency response instead of overly relying on the military. And right now, this is just a pilot project. Do you think that's a step in the right direction? Is it adequate? Are we past the time of trying to pilot things? Do we need to kind of start some sort of civilian disaster response team that doesn't have us relying too much on the military to do a job that they weren't meant to do?
I think you've highlighted a number of really important things. So first off, I would say when we look at the extreme weather and the disasters that we're experiencing is becoming more and more common. And what has been raised as a concern is on one hand, we need the resources, the team, the equipment to deal with the extreme weather. So whether it's fighting fires or helping in the case of floods, putting in place the protections for communities. But in addition, you've highlighted something that many municipalities have raised, that when there's a disaster, particularly in rural or remote areas, these are smaller jurisdictions or smaller municipalities that don't have the resources to manage the emergency response required to maybe evacuate an entire town or neighboring areas. And they've raised the concern that they need to put in place a better team that can respond to emergencies, that putting it on a small community of 10,000 people where everyone has to be evacuated and figuring out the logistics, figuring out what's required to do that is not something in the capacity of those smaller municipalities. They said, we need help to do this. We need help to respond to these crises. So the idea of having a plan in place that is broader, that helps smaller communities deal with this, doesn't leave it on their own, and doesn't only have the military as the sole response is a good idea. I think we are certainly well past the time of having pilot projects, and we need a dedicated response to this ongoing problem that is getting worse. And so while we got to fight the climate crisis, make sure that people can live in their communities, we also need to take steps to prevent the worst from happening when it does. And to do that, we have to place the resources necessary to fight the fires, to save communities that are dealing with extreme weather, whether it's flooding, and then to have the emergency response capacity. And that means having the food, the logistics, and the supports for communities that are often displaced from their homes. So all of this is required. And I think we're past the stage of having a pilot project. We need to have a real plan in place to respond to what might, again, be another record-breaking forest fire season.
I see no more questions online. So this concludes our press conference. Ceci conclut notre conférence de presse. Merci.
Thanks so much. Merci.